Hi everyone, in this lesson, we're going to create some additional decorations for the cover of our planners. A vintage-inspired bookplate, a leather spine cover, and a leather snap. If you're new to this series and haven't seen the previous lessons, you can find a link to the full playlist in the description below. Are you ready? Let's get started. I'm going to start with the leather spine cover as that's the easiest of the three to create. So I want to make sure that I'm in the closed version master page. So I'll go ahead and tap and make sure I'm there. I want to drag out a rectangle that's the height of my book and about 650 pixels wide because that's going to fit nicely, but still leave me space for my book plate around here. I'll grab my rectangle tool. The color doesn't matter. I'm going to replace it with a texture and I'll just start dragging out a tall rectangle. I'll go to my transform panel and in the width, I just want to key in 650. I'm going to clip this inside the cover layer so that the rounded corners of the cover get applied to it. So I'll drag this down and to the right. And because that layer also has a 3D effect applied to it, it automatically applies it to my new shape. So you can see that there. I want to replace the fill with a leather texture. I've selected my shape and I'll select my gradient tool. And using the Bitmap option, I'm going to pull in leather texture that I've downloaded from texturelabs.org. And I've linked to this site below in the description. So I'm going to scale this up so that there's no seams showing. And I'll just drag it to where I want on the texture. So right about there looks good. I feel like this texture is a bit on the cool side and the rest of my palette is pretty warm. So I want to add a color overlay to warm it up a bit. I'll select the layer again, and I'm going to go to the FX panel and toggle on color overlay. I'm going to tap to get the contextual menu and tap this color dot. I want to choose this oatmeal color from my palette, and I'm going to change the blend mode on it to soft light. It's not a big shift, but it's enough to warm it up. While I have the FX panel open, I want to add a bit of a shadow coming in from the left. Now this is a bit thicker than paper, so I'm going to make this shadow a little bit deeper than I did the paper on the inside of the planner. I'll toggle on outer shadow and tap to get the contextual menu. And I'm just going to drag my pencil to the right a little bit. I think I'm going to bring this to about 20 pixels. And I'm going to set the radius to 25. I want to go back into the FX panel and I'm going to scale with object just to make sure if I scale this up and down, it scales with it. Now again, I don't need to add a 3D effect to this layer because I've clipped it inside of a layer that already has it applied. Now that I have this in place, I'm going to copy it and paste it to the inside of the planner. So I'll select it with my move tool. I'm going to hold my finger down and choose copy. I'll go to my master pages and choose the open version of the planner with the rings. And I'm going to turn off the rings and the paper for now just so I can see what I'm doing. I'll hold my finger down again and choose paste. If you recall, when I created the closed version of the planner, it doesn't reach the edges of my canvas, so it's a little bit shorter than the one inside. So I'm just going to bring this over to the right side because my shadow is on the right. And I'll just drag this out so that it's going past the edges a little bit. And I'm going to drag this down and clip it inside the right cover. I don't need to do anything as far as adding a 3D layer because again, that already had one applied to it and all of my shadows are in place. But I want to add one to this side now. So I'll go ahead and duplicate it. I'm going to go up to the top here and choose flip horizontal. I'll hold shift down on my command controller and just drag this over until it snaps into place. Now it's not clipped into the right layer. So I'll just drag this down to the left cover layer. Now I need to do a couple of things. The first thing is I need to change the shadow so it comes out from the left a little bit. So I'm going to go to my FX Studio and tap on outer shadow. And I'll just bring this out to the left, right about there is fine. And then one other thing I want to do is just change the gradient a little bit. This is really matching up here. And if you have anything that's too matchy, it's not only going to be a distraction, but it's also going to take away from the realism. So what I'm going to do is select that layer, grab my gradient tool, and I'm just going to move this around until it's in a different spot. So maybe right about there. And I think I'll move this one as well. Maybe I'll try flipping it and just dragging it over. Most of it isn't going to be seen because the paper will be in place, but the top will be, and I don't want anything distracting from the tabs that are going to be at the top. So I think that looks good. I'll leave that alone. Finally, I want to add a bit of a shadow down the center of this, similar to what I did with the open version of the bound planner. It's going to sit beneath the paper and the binder rings, so it should be a little bit darker here. I'm going to toggle on my guides again. I want to keep it primarily between these two lines here. So I'll grab a rectangle and I'm going to grab a dark brown color. And I'm going to go just above the margins here and then down to the margins at the bottom. I want to round this off. So I'll go up to the top here and choose round. And I can either key in the radius or I can just drag these dots down to 50%. I'm going to go back to my layers and I'm going to change the blend mode of this to multiply and change the opacity to 75%. That's going to allow the texture to come through, but still create a shadow effect. Now, obviously, this is too solid. I want to go back to my FX Studio. I'll toggle on Gaussian blur, tap to get the contextual menu, and I'm just going to drag this up. Again, I want to keep some structure there, but I still want to blur it out on the edges. And I'll just make sure that scale with object is on. Now, I don't want to clip this inside of anything because I want it to be applied to both sides, but I do want to bring it down beneath the paper and the binder rings. I'll turn those back on, and you can see that created a nice shadow, but you can still see the texture and a bit of the highlights through. Let me turn off the guides so you can see a little bit better. With the leather spine cover done, let's move on to creating the snap on the outside of the cover. I'm back in the master page for the closed cover with binder rings, and I want to create a snap on a leather band that matches the spine cover. It's going to be relatively easy because once I have the shapes in place, I can use the style picker to pull the leather texture as well as the cover overlay that's added to it. So I'm going to grab my rectangle tool and I'm going to turn snapping off because it's going to make this next step a little bit easier. The fill doesn't matter because again, I'm going to replace it with that leather texture. I'm just going to start on the outside of the planner and just drag out a long rectangle. I want to round off all four corners, but the two on the left are going to be more rounded than those on the right. So I want to go up to the top here and choose round, and I want to tap this lock so that I have all four available to me. For the top and bottom left, they're going to be 50%. So I'm going to go ahead and change that here and here. For the top right, it's going to be 3%. Now here's where it gets tricky. If you're on a 12.9-inch iPad or larger, you might find that some options in the contextual menu are hidden. I find this next step a little frustrating at times. You want to very carefully use your pencil to drag the contextual menu to the left. I usually try and get to one of these lines here and just drag very carefully. And sometimes it takes a couple of passes to do it. And I'll just pull that right there. So the bottom right is going to be 3% as well. Now, I also want to convert this to a curve, and that's one of the hidden options there, but I can actually use my quick menu to do that. So I'll hold my finger down and choose Convert to Curves. Now, I pulled the side off of the edge a bit because similar to the fabric band that we created on the first version of the closed cover, if this was actually wrapping around the edge, it wouldn't be flush with the edge of the cover. The reason I'm rounding it off on the right side is because in reality, if it were wrapped like this, the slight roundedness is going to give it a feel as if it is actually wrapping. Now again, I don't need to start fresh with the texture or the shadows here. I'm going to select that shape again, and I'm going to go over to my tools and choose the style picker, which by default is hidden under the color picker tool. So I've tapped it, I'll tap it a second time and choose style picker. Now, the first thing I always do when I choose the style picker after selecting it is to make sure that in the contextual menu at the top, it doesn't say picker is loaded. If I had used this within the same session in this canvas, it would hold on to whatever I picked last and show that it's loaded. So if it did, I would want to tap this trash can here. It says picker is empty because I haven't used it, so I'm okay here. Now I'm also going to go to the options here at the top under this eyedropper. Now in this case, leaving this set to all is going to be just fine because it's not going to apply anything that doesn't exist, and anything that does is covered by the rest of the options. However, if I only wanted to pick the leather texture, I would click on none and then choose fill. If I only wanted to pick the drop shadows, I would click on none and choose layer effects. Again, in this case, I want both, and there's nothing else that will accidentally be applied. So I can go ahead and click all. Making sure that my snap layer is selected and highlighted in blue, I'm going to tap on the leather spine layer, which is going to apply both the leather texture and the layer effects. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that because the shape is so much smaller than the spine cover, it's not applying the texture correctly, but I can easily correct that by selecting my gradient tool and just dragging this back out. I also want to correct the drop shadow because right now everything is to the right because of the way the leather spine cover was. So I'll go to my FX Studio, tap to get the contextual menu for the outer shadow. And in this case, I'm going to drag it down and slightly to the left. And I'm going to bring the radius up a touch. I'm going to go back to the FX Studio, tap the plus sign, and I want to bring this one up and to the left, just slightly, a little less than the other. Remember, with an object like this, if you were looking down from the top, the drop shadow would be mostly on one side, but it wouldn't be entirely on the bottom. There would be a slight shadow at the top as well. Finally, I want to add a 3D effect to this that's going to add a bit of a highlight to the curve here and add a shadow along the bottom and the right side. So I'll toggle on 3D and tap to get the contextual menu. Now my highlight is on the right side, so I need to go down to the bottom and tap until I get azimuth. And I'm going to key in 145. That should bring it over to the left. Now this is a little harsh, and again, this is fabric. Even though it's leather, it is technically something that's going to diffuse that light a little bit. So I'm going to do two things. The first is I'm going to soften this up a bit. And I'm also going to go up to the radius and bring it up a touch. So maybe to about 12 pixels. So you can see now I have a nice soft highlight here and I have a shadow on the bottom as well as the right side of the object itself, not just the drop shadow. So with the leather piece in place, I want to add the snap next. I'm going to select my ellipse tool and I want to engage shift and command on my command controller. That's going to allow me to pull out a perfect circle from the middle. And I'll just drag out an ellipse. And I'm going to turn snapping back on and just place this so it's in the center, maybe right about there. I want to add a metallic gradient to this, and I'm going to use the same one that I used on the binder rings, but I'm going to use an elliptical one instead of a linear one. In the palette, which I've provided as a download in the description below, in this second one here, this is an elliptical gradient that's going to take that same exact color and it's going to add the shadow to the outside and bring the gradient up into the top so it's light on the top, gives it a bit of a rounded feel. But I want to take this another level, so I want to add a 3D effect to it. I'll go to my FX Studio and I'm going to toggle on 3D, tap to get the contextual menu. And I don't want this to be flat. I actually want it to be rounded so it kind of plays into that gradient. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring my radius up to right about there. So that's about 45 pixels. I want it slightly flat on the top. I'm going to go down to the bottom and change my azimuth because again, the highlight's on the right side and I want it on the left. So that's about 138. And I'm going to back up and just see if that spectral highlight's a little too heavy. I think actually that's fine. No, I'm not going to add texture to this because it's such a small object. It's not really going to be seen. And I don't like to add texture unless it's really going to have an impact. So I'm going to leave that alone. However, one final thing that I want to do is go back to my FX Studio and I'm going to toggle on outer shadow and bring one down to the right and just bring the radius up. And again, I'm going to duplicate that and bring the duplicate up to the left a little bit. I'll make sure scale with object is on and my snap is done. Off camera, I've gone ahead and named all of my layers. So for the snap, I have my metal snap and the leather part of the snap. And I've grouped that up. I do not want to clip this inside of the cover because again, I have it hanging off the edge. And if I clip it into the cover shape, it's going to cut that away. I've gone ahead and named my leather spine. What I could do with these is I could technically save them to my assets so I can pull them in whenever I want. The one thing I will warn you is the more textured items you save to your assets, especially on the iPad, the more difficulty you're going to have with your iPad and with the app itself. I'm very particular about what I save to my assets, and typically it's something that I pull the texture off of and I only save the shapes themselves. So I could take the leather texture out of this and just put a solid vector shape, pull that into my assets, pull it out, and I can add whatever I want. With the snap done, let's finish off the tutorial and the cover itself with the vintage inspired bookplate. I want to create a metal textured bookplate that has a bit of a vintage inspired feel to it. I'm going to select my rectangle tool. The fill doesn't matter just yet, and I'll just drag out a rectangle. I want to make sure that it's not so large that it crowds the whole book, but I want enough room for someone to write in either whose book it is or what it's about. I want to create cutouts in the corners to play into the quatrefoil shapes that I used for the cover. So with the rectangle tool selected, I'll go up to the contextual menu at the top and choose round inverse. And I'm going to set the radius of those to 10%. I want to lock those into place, so I'll tap convert to curves. I'm going to go to my palette and I want to change this fill to a linear metallic gradient that I have in my palette. So I'll tap this first one. This is similar in color to the ones I used for the binder rings. The difference being that I didn't add dark edges because I'm not looking to create a wrapped look. I wanted more of a flat linear gradient instead. Next, I want to create the cutout for the label to sit behind. So I'm going to select my rectangle tool again, and I'll select a different color just so that you can see what I'm doing. Just going to drag out just a long, kind of short rectangle that's smaller than the other. And I'm going to center this up just to make sure that I have enough room on all sides. I want a good amount of the metal to show. I'm going to duplicate this twice by holding my finger down and choosing duplicate from the quick menu. And I'm going to turn those two duplicates off for now. More on those in a bit. Once everything else is in place, I want to keep the other one selected and I'm going to select the book plate layer. And I want to use the smaller shape to cut out a hole in the other. Whenever you're using subtract, you always want to make sure that the shape that's doing the subtracting is above the other one in the layer stack. So I'll go to the top here and choose subtract, and there's my cutout. I want to add two donut shapes on either side. Those are going to be where the screws are for the book plate. So I'll go back to my shapes here and I'm going to select the donut tool. I want to engage Shift and Command on my command controller. And I'm just going to drag out a shape. I want to make sure this is vertically centered on my book plate. And I'm going to make sure that no part of the book plate is peeking into that hole. So I'm just going to pull that to the left a bit. Backing up, I'll go ahead and duplicate the shape. I'm going to engage Shift on my command controller and just drag this over to the other side. Shift is going to keep it locked vertically. And again, I want to make sure that my book plate's not peeking out there. I'll select all three shapes, and this time I'm going to add them together. So I'll go up to the top and choose Add, and the two donut shapes are going to take on the same gradient that I already had in place on the book plate. So while I have this selected, I'll go ahead and name this book plate base. And before I move on, I want to create one of the two screws that are going to sit inside of there. So I'll go to my shapes again, and this time choose my ellipse tool. I'll hold Shift and Command down on the command controller, and I'm just going to drag out an ellipse that's just past the cutout in the donut shape. And I'm going to make sure that in the layer stack, this is sitting above the book plate base. I'm going to go to my palette and I want to add the elliptical gradient that I have here. So I'll just tap to add that, and it's going to add the shading around the edge, just like with the snap. I'm not worried that the color isn't the same. I actually like that because it stands out a little bit. What I want to do is add the cutout where the screwdriver would go in. So I'll go back to my shapes and I'm going to select the square star tool. I'm going to set the sides to 4 and the cutout to 75. I'll hold Shift and Command down and I'm just going to drag out a nice star shape there. I'm going to keep that set to a gradient, but let's try one of the other ones just to see how it looks. I actually like the elliptical gradient. I think it adds nice edges to it, but what I want to do is change the blend mode to either linear burn or multiply. I think I'll go with multiply. I'm going to be adding some dimension and texture to this before I duplicate it and move it to the other side, but for now I'm going to move on to the rest of the shapes. I'm going to turn on one of my duplicates and change the color to this off-white color. This is going to be my paper. I want this to be beneath the book plate base because I'm going to add a drop shadow to that, and I want the drop shadow to end up on the paper. I'm actually going to increase the size of this just a little bit. I'll scale it up using transform panel. I'm not worried about it being even on all sides. I just want it to be slightly larger than the cutout, just so that there's no gaps. And I'll rename this paper. I'll be adding some texture to that in a bit. This other duplicate is going to be used to create an outline around the cutout. I'm not going to worry about changing the color of it for right now because I'm going to set my dimension and all that first, and I'll use what I set here to create that. The only thing I'm going to do right now is turn this to a stroke. And I want to set this to a stroke where you're going to be able to see the metallic gradient that I'm going to add to it, but not so much that it takes up a lot of space. Right now I have this set to 8 points and I think that looks good. So I'm just going to go back to my layers and rename this outline, and I'll leave that as is for right now. With all of the shapes in place for now, I want to add some effects, and I'm going to start with the book plate itself. I don't want this to look pillowy. I want to add a 3D effect to it to give it a slightly raised feel, but I want to be very careful about how much I bring the radius up. So I'm going to select that layer, go to my effects and toggle on 3D, tap to get the contextual menu. The first thing I'll do is go down to the bottom here and choose azimuth and just move the highlight to the left side. Now this is a good start as far as the radius. Again, I don't want it to be puffy, but I'm going to try, let's try 7 pixels just to see how that looks. I can always change it. This is non-destructive. I'm not locking anything in. And I want to go back to my FX. I'll toggle on outer shadow, and I'm going to drag the shadow down and to the right to right about 9 pixels. And I'll change the radius of it. Let's try 15. I don't want this to look like it's floating, so I'm going to try 8. I'm going to go back to my FX Studio. I'll tap the plus sign here to duplicate that. And I want to drag this up and to the left so it's peeking out at the top left just slightly. Before I forget, I want to make sure that scale with object is on. And I'm going to use the effects on this to change the outline. So what I'll do is go back to my layers. With that layer selected, I'm going to hold my finger down and choose copy. I'll go to the outline layer and select it, hold my finger down, and I'm going to choose paste style. Now that's changed that to a fill. I'm not worried about that. I'm going to flip that to a stroke. It's set inside of the shape. So what I'm going to do is hold shift and command down and just drag out slightly until it pops to the outside and it's sitting on top of the shape. So you can see I have the outline and the book plate is beneath it. I want to add some dimension to the screw next. Now off camera, I renamed the screw and I took the screw cutout and clipped it inside of the other. I'm actually going to add 2 different effects to this. For the screw, I'll go to the FX and I'm going to toggle on 3D, tap to get the contextual menu. Now in this case, I actually want to bring the radius up pretty high. So I'm going to start with 55 and just see how that looks. I want to change the azimuth to 145. And I think I'm going to make it a little bit flatter. So let's try 45. Maybe a little flatter than that. All right, maybe right about there. And I think I will bring the screw cutout. I'm going to bring the size of that down just a touch and make sure it's centered up. Now for the screw cutout, I want to add an additional effect to that. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to turn on inner shadow and tap to get the contextual menu. And I'm just going to drag to the right until you start to see some shadows come inside here. This is going to give it depth. I'll just bring that up slightly. I want to maintain structure of it, but blur it up at the same time. Now that I have that done, I'm going to duplicate that shape, grab my move tool, and I'm going to lock the vertical by turning on shift and just drag this over until it snaps over to this side. And I'll just snap that into place there. With all of my dimension in place, I want to start adding texture, but I want to be very careful about how I add it. And the reason I say that is I've used a lot of texture throughout the rest of the cover as well as the open version. So I don't want to add any texture that I don't actually need. What I'm going to do is add some paper texture to the paper layer, and I'm going to group the book plate up. I'll go ahead and rename this book plate. And I'm going to duplicate that group to use the duplicate as a vector clipping mask. So let's start with the paper. That's actually the easiest. I'm going to go to my stock studio and I've keyed in craft paper. I like this one by Resource Boy. I'm just going to drag it in. It's going to be much larger than I need. So I'll go to my transform panel. I'm going to set my anchor to the center and just drag down until it's larger than the paper piece, but not as large as it came in. And I'll just go ahead and rotate this. I'm holding shift down. I'm going to clip this inside of the paper layer. And I want to use a combination of blend mode and blend option to pull everything out except for the darkest parts of that craft paper texture. Adding texture to a lighter color can be tricky. So what I'm going to do first is change the blend mode to multiply. And you can see that changed the warmth of it. And that's because it's pulling the off-white color through. But I still have some of the brown from the original image in place. So what I want to do is go up to the top here with that texture layer selected, and I'm going to choose the layer options. I'll go to this source grid here. This is the layer I have selected. If I drag down on the left side here, it's going to get rid of all of the darker parts of my texture. If I drag down on the right, it's going to get rid of everything but the darkest parts. Now, since I want to remove everything but the darkest parts of the texture, I'll drag this right side down and you can see the off-whites coming through. But I have that nice little gritty part of the texture that's giving me that paper effect. Now for the book plate, I'm going to use the place tool and I'm going to select some metal texture that I pulled in from Texture Labs. I'll just drag that out. And I think I'm going to flip this. I want this texture down here. I'm going to go back to my layers here and I want to take that duplicate group and drag it up and to the left over the icon for this layer. That's going to create a vector clipping mask. And then I'll make sure I tap to select the whole layer. And I'm going to change the blend mode either to multiply, that's a little dark, or soft light. Let's just see how that looks. I like soft light better. I think it adds the texture, but it allows that nice metallic gradient to come through. I could drop the opacity just a touch. Let's see. No, I think I'll bring it back. I liked it at 100%. I'm going to group everything up and name the entire thing Bookplate Final. With everything in place, for the rest of the series, I want to use this version of the closed book as well as the matching open version, but I need to make sure that my pages are updated so that the correct master pages are applied to each. If I go to my pages here, you can see that if I tap on this cover one, it's applying that first one. So I am going to hold my finger down, choose Apply Master, and I want to go in and choose Cover with Rings. That's going to change that. I want to change the other two. Now I could do one at a time, just like I did with the cover, but the easiest way to do duplicates is to go to Manage Pages. I'm just going to run my pencil along here to select all of those. I'll go to this third icon here. I want to choose the open background with rings. And I want to make sure that replace existing is toggled on because I want to replace the existing master page. And I also want to make sure that my specified pages are 2 to 5. I'll click OK. And it might take a beat, but it's going to change both at the same time. And now if I go back, you can see that it's changed both. And I have that leather spine cover in there in both. That's it for this lesson. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know in the comments below. In the next lesson in the series, which will be a live premiere, I'll create the tabs for the inside using text frames and text styles. If you're able to join the live premiere, I'll be online in the chat answering any questions you may have. If you're not able to join, I'll always answer your questions in the comments below. If you're not currently subscribed to the channel, be sure to do that so you know whenever something's published or scheduled. The next one is coming up soon, but in the meantime, if you want to check out the rest of the series, you can find it here. Thanks for watching.